This is my go-to camera for portraits. It's not budget, it's not small, it's not lightweight, but I love it. Does that mean it's the best camera for portraits? No, not at all. It's just a matter of personal preference. And that's why today I'll go out with my Canon M50 and the kit lens to give you some portrait photography tips. Now, if you're looking for fashion or lifestyle portrait photography tips, then this is not the video for you. I'm a documentary photographer and that's the kind of portraits I shoot. So today, nothing about makeup or posing, none of those things. Emotion, atmosphere, natural light. That's what we want. Before we go out, let's talk about settings first. And honestly guys, I don't know if there's such a thing as budget camera photography tips. But that's exactly why I want to use my Canon M50 today. So I'll find out soon enough if there's a difference between shooting with my expensive camera and a budget camera, like the Canon M50. I'll tell you all about that at the end of the video. Okay, so settings. I don't like fancy settings. On my Pentax, I only use like 10% of the settings, maybe even less, but I do like a shallow depth of field, so I'm gonna shoot at low aperture numbers. For the Canon M50's kit lens, that means 3.5, but 6.3 when zoomed in all the way. So we'll see how shallow that depth of field will be. And usually I use aperture priority mode. That's the AV setting. You set the aperture and then the camera deals with the shutter speed automatically. And if you use that mode, still always keep an eye on the shutter speed, because if it's too slow, you gotta do something, or your photos will be blurry. And that's it for the settings, that's where I'm gonna start. Now, the big difference between my Pentax and the Canon M50 is gonna be the viewfinder. I'm used to an optical viewfinder and I love using an optical viewfinder, but the Canon M50 has an electronic viewfinder. I think most people who use the Canon M50 will compose their shots on the screen, and that's totally fine because it's designed for that, but I'm not used to it. So we'll see if I like that or not and if it will give me any problems. Let's just go out. I already went outside, but there's so much wind, I'll do the talking in here so you can actually hear me. Okay, so let's say you're doing a street photography project or a documentary project right here in this location. You meet someone interesting and you want to make some portraits. First thing I do every time is scan the whole environment for backgrounds. The background is something a lot of beginners forget, but it's just as important as the subject. There's so much you can do with the background. You can use colors, depth, frames, shapes, objects. Changing the background changes the whole story of your photo. Let me show you a few examples to show you the different possibilities. So here I find this bush interesting. It's what I call an easy background. Some green always looks nice and all you need to do is put the subject in front of it. The background will pretty much do the hard work for you. If you really want, you can also use the branches and leaves to create some depth. It depends on your style. So a background like that pretty much always works. But it depends on the story you want to tell and who you're photographing and why. What's the whole context of your project? Depending on that, there's another option. Just turning 45 degrees will give you this background. All of a sudden there's more depth, a different feel, an atmosphere, a different story. I really like these kind of backgrounds with a lot of depth. And then at the same location there are these backgrounds, which for me are less interesting. Doesn't mean I don't use them, but I didn't feel it right away, you know? So at any given location, you have multiple options for a background, and it's just a matter of turning left or right. You don't have to explore the whole area. Always remember that. Don't just stop someone and shoot a photo. The least you should do is turn left or right to see if there's a better background for your story. Okay, but now the most important tip. When you pick a background, it doesn't stop there. Don't just put your subject in front of the background and that's it. Moving your camera left or right or up and down, just a little bit within that background, changes the whole composition and feel of an image. It only takes a few centimeters, and that's where you can really make the difference. The position of your subject in relation to the background is super important because you can hide the subject in the background or you can make the subject the center of attention, make it pop. And all that by just moving the camera a few centimeters to the left, right, up or down. Now let's see what the result was with my Canon M50 and the kit lens. Maybe you've already noticed that the light was pretty bad and annoying, from super cloudy to bright sun every 5 minutes. But actually, I'm impressed. Even with such an annoying and difficult light, the Canon M50 does a pretty great job. And at the end of the video, I'll tell you what I liked and didn't like about shooting with the Canon M50. But yeah, so annoying light. What you can always do when you're shooting at noon in the bright sun is look for some shadow. Here, I used that bush to cast a shadow on her face, and as long as the face is in the shadow, it usually turns out pretty good. You just don't want harsh shadows in the face. If you can avoid that, you're good. I've always said that the key is to make your subject feel comfortable, but I have to come back from that, because in documentary photography, it's not always the case. Documentary photography is not about taking a nice photo of a person. It's about capturing an emotion or a personality, and definitely not taking the nicest, best looking photo of that person. So if a person is naturally introvert or something like that, you don't want to portray them as being super confident and make them feel comfortable. Always think about who you're photographing. In a way, what we feel in documentary photography is more important than what we see. In a way, of course, because it's still a visual medium. And then we have the framing of the subject, and that's where you have to make some decisions. Close-up, medium, or wide, full body. If you're photographing someone with specific facial features, you should always include close-ups. But my favorite, something I include in a lot of my projects, but a lot of beginners don't, is full-body, wide environmental portraits. I like to show the subject in the environment, especially if it's an environment that's close to that person, because he or she lives or works there. And most importantly, what kind of shoes someone wears, the posture, pants, it all tells something about that person, and you can only see that when you include everything in the frame. Okay, now let's check out the results from my Canon M50 with the kit lens again. It looks pretty darn good again. The only thing I don't like about the kit lens is that I can't get a blurred background with these environmental portraits, no matter what I try. And I don't want a completely blurred out background, but just slightly. For medium or close-ups, there's no problem. Zoomed in all the way at f6.3 looks really good. There's a nice blur. But for a full body wide portrait, I just can't get it right. So when you're photographing with a kit lens, for example, always know what the limits are. And the last tip, of course, the classic light. Now, it's a matter of taste. There is no right or wrong light. I know a lot of photographers prefer soft light, especially for portraits. But does that mean that you can't shoot in the bright sun? No, of course not. I already showed you that you can use a bush or something else to cast a shadow on your subject's face. So you can shoot in any light, no problem. But you do have to learn the differences in light, because that's really important. It's also not always easy to spot good light. Sometimes you discover it by accident, when you shoot and you look on the screen of your camera and you're like, damn, that looks good. Today was super cloudy, which I really liked for portraits, but the sun also came out a lot, and that I don't like. When it's sunny, I usually wait until the sun starts to set. Late afternoon, evening, soft golden light always looks amazing. And then you can play around with the light too, like in this picture. But also when it's cloudy, there's a difference. Don't think that the light is the same the whole day if it's cloudy the whole day. There's a big difference between shooting at noon on a cloudy day and shooting in the evening on a cloudy day. In the evening, it always looks better. Well, for me at least. Okay, so budget camera. Overall, pretty good. I really like the results, and also when editing, everything looks really nice. Not as good as my medium format Pentax. There's a difference in tonal range and highlight roll-off, but it's not so significant that it looks bad on the Canon M50, not at all. I'm also really surprised about the viewfinder. Composing on the screen, that's not for me, I know that now. I feel like I can't see everything properly, the details, you know? I want to go in there and see every little corner of my frame. But I could definitely get used to an electronic viewfinder, no problem. It wasn't annoying or anything like that. And I used both manual focus and autofocus with face detection, which actually I really liked in this case. The only downside to the Canon M50 with the kit lens is the kit lens. It's a great little lens, but I'm missing f2.8, f2, f1.4, especially for portraits. Like I said, I'd really like to see a slightly blurred background when I shoot wide portraits, but it's just not there. It's also not the sharpest lens, so the best way to drastically improve this little camera is to buy a nice prime or zoom. The kit lens will do for a lot of hobby photographers, but if you want that little extra, you need something else. I got the best results when shooting close-ups and medium portraits, zoomed in all the way at f6.3. It looks really good. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.